Much for joining our webinar. My name's Dennis Singh. I'm the Customer Experience Director for NEXA, and with me I'm joined with Grant Maskell, who's our Customer Experience Designer and does a lot of work for us within Customer Experience. I'd like to say a very big welcome to, I'm looking through the attendees that are coming through, and thank you very much to our clients who have joined us, as well as any distinguished guests. We've also got some of our NEXA team on the line, so hopefully this becomes a bit of an educational session for them as well. We've got 30 minutes today, and the agenda is going to be quite tight, and obviously we're going to go through a lot of key points around customer experience. The focus today, we thought we'd engage in some open dialogue. Please feel free to add some questions or comments that you may have. Down the bottom left of the screen there should be a little chat box, and that's where you can start to put some of those through. Today we're going to look at customer experience in the essence of day-to-day work, but as well as provide you guys with some takeaways that you can go back and start to work within your business. One of our first key areas today we're going to speak a little bit about is the role of data and how that's used when we're defining good customer experience. We'll look at some tools and techniques that help gather that data and what you actually do when you have it. How do you derive some meaning from it and unlock insight? We'll also give you some few pointers around leadership and the value of having engagement from your leadership team, what that actually means and how you can action that in your business. And finally, we'll look at a few examples effectively on how to put insights into action. So this first slide really just tries to capture the essence of, if there's 4 key things you can take away from this webinar today, what are those things that you should be doing in your business? One of the key areas in NEXA that we involve a lot of our work in is involving the customer as much as possible through not only our project implementations or the work we do day to day. We offer a co-design type model where we actually work alongside our customer to design the best products or solutions for their experience that we need. It is a conversation, and I really stress that because a lot of customer experience and user experience designers often come into a problem space and they say, I know what the best answer is, but as Grant and I both advocates, it really is about an open conversation, having open dialogue, seeing what their views are, what their opinions are, and being a very good listener to try and understand and delve into what their problems are. Grant, you might want to add a comment in around their success at granular levels. I think that's really important for our listeners as well today.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the problems people have when they first start any CX activity is hoping that the goals will come at the end of it. But one of the things that Dennis and I both believe in, and projects I've worked on, the first thing we do is we sit down and at a very granular level trying to work out what our goals actually are and what we're trying to succeed out of doing this. CX can be very much a buzzword, and like anything and like any business, you're out there to generate revenue, to make money. You're going to start with that, where you're trying to get that from, and then you turn it back around into a CX process. And as Dennis said, it's a two-way street. I think brands are so used to, over the years, have been programmed to push things out to people, where the interesting part about CX, and it happened with social media a few years ago as well, it turned its back on its head, where it's now about actually listening with your customers and being involved with them rather than pushing information out to them all the time.
Excellent. Which brings us, I guess, to our first point around data, I guess, and it's becoming a very big area in a lot of the customer experience work or projects that we're involved in. Well, when people actually say, well, where or how did you actually guide your CX design? Data is becoming a very, very important aspect of that. And one of the first points which we need to consider, or for you guys out there on the line who are going to embark on your CX project, start to look at how you can make use of unstructured data. For those of you who don't know what unstructured data is, essentially it's data that hasn't been formatted, doesn't align to any business model, hasn't gone through a process where it's organized. An example is customer inquiries. So start to look at how you make use of that. Connecting data systems is also something that's very important. What we look at, not just internally in NEXA, but obviously other CX projects, is around how do the data systems or the data sources you have, once you aggregate them, how do they make value? How do they actually tell you a compelling story around the different businesses or operations that you have? Helping different areas on your, obviously getting data from different areas in your business, such as the sales, service and finance channels. In healthcare, extending beyond your clinics to your patient data, to other areas within healthcare is really important to look at how you see it as an overall experience, not just looking at it in silos or in isolation from one area to the other. I think the other important point is allowing customer-facing people easy access to combined, obviously, customer data. So one of the points, and I've just written down here, which I'll just get out, is looking essentially at how effective it is for customers who are in the front line of your business or your service, how they actually get access or how they are actually using your company data. I mean, there's probably a good point as well you were raising to me earlier about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way street. It's not just coming from the top, it's going to come from the people. In my experience, the most helpful people I've ever found whenever I do any CX work is actually going to the frontliners. The people who sit at the desks, the people who are out there on site with people. They're the people who have more data than anybody else. Customer call centers are just such a wealth of data, and it's how you get that data back into the business. Which is really a big challenge for people.
It's actually a really good point, Grant. And one of the things recently we were looking at is NEXA delivered a large-scale enterprise sort of transformation project for a large services organisation in New South Wales. And one of the interesting aspects was looking at how we tie in the operational end to the front end, back office, obviously data, but gave them the capability to do real-time data reporting. So this obviously helped people in branch to see how are their quality of service, what are their feedback response rates, failure to attend, etc. So all that started to become something very visible from different areas of the business. So that's one example of how that can come together. Demonstrating or enabling, I guess, your customers to define their profile. This is really interesting because one of the initial stages of a CX engagement is often to look at your customers and customer profiling. Recently, we completed a piece of work for a Victorian healthcare provider, which looked at how do we take profiling not just at a very standard segmented level, but how do we employ empathy-based profiles, which looks at what are they thinking, what are they seeing, what are they hearing and doing. So one of the points here is start to look at how you profile your customers relevant to your industry. That's what I think is really, really key.
And one of the interesting parts about that is we're very easy to pigeonhole customers. So we go out, we create our profiles, and then the next question is which customer fits into which profile. And I think the challenging part in life is that people flit in and out of different profiles
they do.
as they go through life. And I always find it funny if anyone would look at my profile for my age. I'm actually completely opposite to what you would think. And it's always strange. So you've got to look at how people generate, move, and go through your profiles from time to time, rather than just trying to say 20% of my people fit in this pigeonhole and 30% of people fit in that. Because in some industries, people can change over days between two profiles, and how do you manage that process is really tricky.
Very, very good point. Another point that's come up is often around customers who are looking at your business effectively as a partnership. And having the data, or absolutely having data that's relevant and contextual to the types of business decisions you're making is really important. It demonstrates them that they can evolve and transform their quality of service with you. It also gives them confidence that the data that they're relying on to make their business decisions is accurate and it's valid for what they're actually trying to achieve as well. Just as a final summary point, it's really important as well when you're looking at the data side of customer experience is not to get caught in the internal trap. And I think we've both found this in our projects and our work to date is sometimes it's very heavy to go down the internal path of internal reporting, internal scorecarding, internal dashboarding. But what's really important is start to look at, well, how does this data actually achieve a better state in the end goal? How does it drive a better outcome in the customer experience design? It doesn't have to be about the substance or how much data you have, but more about the quality that it gives at the end of the customer experience.
Yeah. And I think there's a reverse of that, which is people's instantaneous reaction when you say CX is to go out and start surveying everybody. And then you can get the exact opposite fool's gold, which is you go out and start basing all your decisions on some survey data. And it really is, when you look at where we say merge relevant customer data streams, you want the inside, you want the out, you want the qualitative data, and you want the quantitative. So unstructured data, verbatims, what your customers are saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, to go along with that actual numerical data to prove what's going on within the business. It's when you merge all that together and you start making business decisions on that, you find that the power actually comes to people's hands.
So a couple of key takeaways, I guess, from myself and from Grant here is some things that you can do tomorrow is look at know the data people in your organization or the people who have the information. Often there's a strategy around how they're actually managing that information or where they're actually taking it to. That's really important for you to get your heads around. Also start to promote, I guess, good data practices. So rather than having lots of shared, multiple, disparate sources, try and look at how you can consolidate them and where and which data repositories or sources are of most business value to you.
Yep.
That's another really important area for you to consider.
It just always makes me think of a quote from one of the heads of Google one day when they said, "You're a really good company," and he just turned around and said, "Not really." He said, "We just have lots of data and we work out what to do with that data a little bit later on."
Absolutely,
It's the same for most companies. Get your data, put it all together, then work out what to do with it. Sometimes don't go try and retrofit where you're trying to head as a business through your data and looking for that in your data.
Absolutely, and we found this throughout, working with our clients and in industry. A lot of clients and a lot of industry partners tend to take the approach of heading a CRM, buy a massive content management software, buy a data warehouse without actually taking some of the behavioral and change management views on board well before they embark on the project. This is a really interesting topic I wanted to talk about, is that CX isn't just satisfaction. I think, Grant, you can lead in with this because you've had some interesting views on this, and I'll probably hand over to you to talk to our listeners out there.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things whenever I go to a company and I start to talk CX with them, I hear those magic 3 little letters come out, and the first thing is, "What is my NPS score?" And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with an NPS score as a way of benchmarking things, but good CX is not about just an NPS score. And it's not just about satisfaction. That's actually an end goal. We want customers to be satisfied, obviously. That's a given. So we shouldn't talk about those sorts of things. But there's a lot of things in CX world that we look at that are factors that influence how we can do things there. And one of them is just things like, what do customers know about our service? You've talked about some of the work we've done recently of empathetic profiles. And I think one of the most interesting parts we found out of that was how little the people knew about the breadth, length of the services that this company actually provided. Intrinsic sales mechanisms just waiting to be taken care of there, that people didn't know that their customers didn't even know those services.
Absolutely, and they took an approach which was very much broad brush. They didn't look at how they tailor their services to specific types of profiles of customers.
Yeah, exactly right. Which leads on to, what aspects of services have customers used? Do they know about you in the past? I'm doing a piece of work as well, looking at, why do people not come back to us? Or are they not coming back to us because they're not spending anymore, or are they off going and doing something else with another company? You've got to look at what they've used from you before and why they're not using it now, and the reverse of that, why are the people who are using it from you all the time using it? And it's also, when do they last use the aspects of the service? So about frequency, about trying to do modeling and time, about how people, one of the biggest challenges in a CX world is where you have a service that, is not always on. It comes into person's life at a certain trigger point. How do you be at the forefront of their mind when they do that? And sometimes it is going back to the last time, which can be years ago.
It's a really good point. And most recently, the experience design team and I were out at a large hospital in New South Wales and Western New South Wales, and we looked at observational studies as a means for going back and seeing, how are actually patients interacting with the quality of service that they have? How are they leaving feedback? How are they wayfinding and navigating their way around their healthcare services? And it's important that as a client, but you start to look at ways to do this within your own area. NEXA obviously offers this as a service for most of our clients, but the amount of value and insight you can get from one of those studies is just amazing. Really good.
It is absolutely amazing. And again, coming into the frequency, how often and what aspects are they using? So over time, it's very important to get these profiles. And in my life, NPS score is one of the great things out there, but things I look more at like customer lifetime value. How can I make the most out of my customer over a lifetime with them, especially two disparate services where you may only want to be interacting with them 3 or 4 times during their lifetime. How do you make sure you're in their face at those points where you need to be there? You can't do that if you're not out there actually talking to them on a regular basis. And it's also not just thinking of yourself, it's thinking of looking at the other services that are out there before, afterwards, elsewhere, what's going on around the whole space that's around you. I think a naivety within business is to think that when people come to us, that's it, the end of the world stops, and they don't look outside of the world, and they've gone, you're our customer now. One of the big parts about CX is trying to understand the whole world and the whole ecosystem of what's going on around them. We talked about the empathetic profiles, what they're seeing, what they're hearing, what's going on at all times. It's very important you know where you sit within that landscape, because it can be quite a muddy landscape out there, and customers are the poor person sitting at the other end of it.
That's true. And the interesting thing is, for a lot of the clients we observe and customers that we actually do engage with, switching is ever more easier than it ever was before in terms of quality of service or service providers. So that's something that's very, very important to consider as well, is when you start thinking about your customer experience, look at it end to end, look at it obviously in context, not of what you just want to give this customer because they're good with you today. As Grant said, customer lifetime value is very important. Are you making strategic investments in the right customers for your business?
Exactly, and I think that's one of the most important points, the right customers. Sometimes it's easy to go out there and use the shotgun effect of trying to find as many people as you possibly can, but retaining those customers who are your right customers and finding them and getting the most out of them over a lifetime is one of the hardest parts. Which kinds of, if we're trying to summarize this and bring it all together, it's understand and measure what customer value about the service, access to the service when available and when it's needed. How do we get in front of the person at the right time when they need us and be there for them when they need us? Make sure we have access to the services that are available at the time and in what way that people need it. One of the interesting things, the shift that's going on in the world at the moment, we'll talk about digital as being the biggest shift in the world, but it's actually blended. Digital is only ever part of a service. Unless you're a completely online company, there's so many other parts to your business that go on that you can't just say digital is going to solve the world for me. And you need to make sure that this blended approach between face-to-face, bricks and mortar, online and digital, that seamlessness is exactly what customers are looking for. And that's when they come back to you, when they feel like that they're dealing with one company, not dealing with a company that looks like this online and a company that looks like this when you're face-to-face and looks like this when you're
and that's another thing for our listeners out there to think about is obviously there's a lot of buzzwords around website and omni-channel and digital. The main thing is that it all comes down to the fact that there are customers or clients or patients at the end of the day that are using this service, and their expectation is they want to pick up from where they left off. They want to know that if there's something that they haven't done well, they're nurtured into a pathway or they're nurtured into a way that's going to make sense for them, it's going to be relevant. So as Grant said, obviously making sure that you can give contextually relevant information to help guide them through that decision at that time is really important. So this is an interesting part of our segment, which starts to look at a few considerations around tools and types of techniques that we use in customer experience. This first point is going to bring up probably a lot of contention and debate, but we're strong believers that journey maps are out of date the moment you create it. So essentially, you probably all, if you Google, and Grant and I were talking about this morning, customer experience in Google, you do get customer journey mapping. What's important to remember is that the journey map provides you a basis to make some recommendations, some decisions. However, it is not the go, be all, end all. Grant, the role of data you might want to talk about here is really most important as well.
Yeah, so as I said, as Dennis was talking about, the minute you actually make a journey map, it's out of date as far as I'm concerned because more data is coming in. So the real thing is how do you switch this on and be always on with journey maps? And later in life, I toned down journey maps to be more of a living, breathing document within my life, within companies, rather than I've been to so many companies where it's like, I've done the CX, I've done the journey map. And you'd be like, well, what are you doing with it now? You're like, nothing. It's sitting on the wall over in the corner there, gathering dust at this point in time. So when you think of the tools, it is important to think about how the tools integrate. So we talked about data. You've got a journey map. How do you actually bring all this together to be a living, breathing environment? And how do you get these journey maps I love seeing them. The journey maps are on the wall with inside the CX department.
Mm.
How do they get out to the people on the ground and who are actually dealing with customers, customer call centers? When was the last time a journey map was ever distributed to a customer call center person to show them?
And my view on this really is that when you do create a journey map, it should be actionable. There should be opportunities that are linked to a business benefit or some recommendations around what you could do to solve a specific problem and how you're going to start measuring that as it evolves.
Definitely.
So the role of technology becomes important in that, in the sense that you need to start to understand, well, how does this journey map start to overlay in technology or the capability you have in your organization? This also looks at not just the data, but linking into your CRM, linking into your business benefits, etc., and other areas.
Yep. And I think, as I was saying with the journey maps, the number one thing about any tool that you bring into the system, it has to be continuous and not instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
And that is that constant data is coming in, constant data is coming out that's feeding in through the business. Which brings me on to one of my last points when it comes to tools. A lot of CX people think it's all about surveys, and going out and buying and paying off their customers to do surveys. And in my mind, and from all my experience, anytime you try and incentivize data out of a customer, you end up with false data. The richness and trueness of any data comes from when the customer is willing to give it to you free of charge.
I agree.
When they come to you and they tell you about it, when they're giving it to you without any problem. And again, I come back to it now, that's where frontline people are so important. They get free of charge data given to them on a minute by minute basis. But most of them never have an opportunity to do anything with that data as they go through. So it's very important that you think about that. If you continually going out and buying panels of people and running focus groups of people and paying them, you may be ending up with just false data. Which kind of, if I had to summarize the tools, there's three things that you need to make sure that any tool that you create is, number one, it's empathetic to real people. That's a given being in the CX world. But number two, it's universal. The data is available to people who are out there. And the biggest challenge I see is, number three, is making it understandable to the average person.
Yeah.
You see these lovely dashboards that go to people and they're great. But no average person can understand what they mean when it comes to it. So when you consider any tool that you put in there, make sure that you're making it for the mass and you're making it for everybody.
Definitely agree. Unlocking CX. So this is a few talking points we've actually put together where we thought it's really valuable for you guys to take away and think, well, how do you actually unlock, or when you're designing a CX project or experience you're working on, what are some of the things that you need to consider? Grant and I have, in our experience, have found that CX plans and CX strategies are very important, and they're not just paperwork for the sake of it. A good CX plan will allow you to monitor how you're achieving your outcomes on a various basis. So whether it's quarterly, half yearly, what is it actually you're setting as your targets? It allows your customers to make or empower them around certain decision making as part of that plan or approach. It also gives you an opportunity to break the silos. What we found is, in a lot of organizations, CX is seen as almost the first part of the engagement, then it's forgotten about. So it's confused with user interface design, it's confused with visual design, and it's looked at, we need a CX designer to come here and sort us out. What's important is to start off with the overall core strategy. What are you trying to solve? What problems are you trying to help in your organization? What organizational capability do you have to solve those? So the strategy starts to embed itself in the business planning cycle. It starts to embed itself in the strategic roadmaps or the technology roadmap. So you're involving, I guess, key areas of the business. You might want to talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think the word break is quite interesting. I've been into companies and you'll go back with all your propositions to them of what makes good CX out of it. And the first thing that they do is they go, we can't deal with that because we're not structured in that way. And I just look at them and I feel sad. My heart drops because it's like you want to be better. Yeah. You want to be better at dealing with customers. Sometimes that means taking some really painful, hard decisions to change the way you actually do things to be able to, to go to that next level to empower CX. CX by itself, CX, UX, any of these things, they're not divisions within companies. They're a way of life that you have to get everyone thinking and feeling and acting, and that point above, empowering customer-made decision-making. That's not at the top level. That's not at the middle level. it's at every level of the business.
Correct.
You know, all the way down. How does everyone make a customer, you know, an empathized customer decision all the way through? And again, to do that, sometimes that means going out and actually breaking your current business structure and your business silos to make that happen.
Another big point around the planning is group-specific action plans. And we had experience with a client quite recently where we looked at how do we actually embed workable tactical plans in each area of their business that would help align into their overall customer experience strategy. So with action plans, they should be smart, as it goes without saying really, something which looks at measuring the outcomes of those plans. And once again, looking at who are or which are the best capability areas in the organization to help achieve that or realize the goals within those plans as well.
And last and surely not least is you know, someone needs to be the leader. Someone needs to take charge of this. In the modern world, in so many companies, you're seeing you know, a new generation of chief officer coming about, and they call the chief customer officer.
Yeah.
You know, and they are the person who takes the control. In smaller business, though, that doesn't have to mean you have to have this formal process. It just means having people involved in the industry who are passionate about understanding customers, understanding what their role is, and driving that into the business as you know, going back to point 2, making customer-made decisions. Basically, that's the part we're looking for.
Definitely. So it brings us to sort of starting the close of our webinar session, and we thought we'd leave you guys, I guess, with a few key points to think about. And one of those is around some of the internal and external initiatives that you have in your organization and you're looking for CX. The key point here, I think, is to just remember that customer experience isn't, you know, it's not just a deliverable. It's a continual cycle. As Grant said, it's a mindset. To help achieve good customer experience, that means well before customers have heard about you or your service, they need to be able to understand that you are going to provide them a level of service that's superior or consistent to what they're actually looking for. It helps solve their problems. You follow up with them. That's got to be something that's embedded in your company culture effectively. Another point is, and Grant and I were talking today, is about the internal versus or outside story. If you are talking about your business or your brand or your healthcare service, whatever industry or market you're in, it's important to remember the choice of language you use and the story you tell is a compelling one, but it makes sense to both your internal stakeholders as well as your outside customers.
Exactly right. And probably the last thing to talk about is really, and you know, we are coming short on time, so I'm just going to go through these quite quickly, is you've got to spend money to get the return on it. Putting a layer of CX over the top of something you have now, it may help, but if you want to really get that heavy level of return on it, you're going to have to spend some money to go out there. You're going to have to be motivated. You're going to have to ask yourself the question, why do I want CX in my business? If you just want it because everyone else is getting one at this point in time, it's not the right reason.
Right.
It's not the right reason to build a CX team. You're going to want it because you want to put the customer at the forefront of everything you want to do, and you've got to be able to go around that. It's the customer's world, you know. The customers are the one who are out there. The power, if you look at what's going on in the world at the moment, the power is coming back into the customer's hands. You know, it used to be the brands pushing outward, but the customers are taking over and taking over the world. They've got the money, they've got the power now, and it's where they spend. And probably the last point I really want to wrap up to, like I said, is over time, is think of your customers over a lifetime of dealing with them. Don't think of them as an instantaneous interaction. Don't think of them as walking into a branch, being that. Think about how you're going to have them, maintain them, love them, and keep them for as long as you possibly can.
Absolutely. And finally, look, everyone, have a great CX day. We know we'll be partying it up over here. So wherever you are, enjoy yourselves. Please drop us any comments or lines. There will be a shared web sort of session recording sent out to all attendees. And go to our website, www.nexa.com.au, and see our customer experience team. Get a bit of a feel about our capability and drop us a line if you want us to get on board and help you out with some of the challenges you're facing.
So we do have a couple of minutes left, so if anyone wants to post a question into the chat window, I see the chat window has been going really well since we've been talking, but if anyone's actually got a question that they'd like to post in there, we're more than happy to answer it while we're on here. Of course, now we'll get that unhappy silence while we wait for any questions. But it doesn't look like there are going to be any questions, so we might wrap it up for the day. Sure. And just say thank you to everyone for joining in. It's been really good.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
Take care.
Take care.